tēnā tātou e te iwi. Ko taku ngākau ki te whenua, tāngia taku mata ki te ao. Tāngia taku arero ki te reo. I reira, ka turuturu ai taku āhua Māori, ake nei. Ka tangihia rātou ngā huhua mate o te wā. Tērā te hiri o Waikato, e takoto ana ki runga o taupiri kūao, tūheitia ki te pō. Te ariki nui koe ni ngā wai hono e te pō ki te ao. Tēnā koutou ngā wairua hihiko, ngā taringa areare. Nau mai, rarau mai ki tēnei te kauhaurangi o te taurawhiri tēnei rā. Me tō tātou manuhiri rangatira nei. Kua hara mai i tawhiti ki te wānanga tahi kia tātou. Mauri ora e te whānau. Kia ora tātou, it's an important week here for us at Te Taurawhiri as a motu, as New Tirani, as Aotearoa, as we celebrate our language and its endurance and its persistence and its willingness to survive despite all that it faces. But it's also a really great time for us to sit back, reflect and learn from others. And today we welcome, we're very overjoyed to welcome the very first ever Commissioner for Indigenous Languages for Canada, Commissioner Schmalkin Ronald Ignace, tēnā koe, nau mai, hara mai, to share with us the experiences of our whanaunga, our relations in Canada, so that we collectively can help shine the light on our own languages. Nā reira, e te matua, nau mai, hara mai. Your name, a beautiful name.
Ja, weet je het niet gewoon Elias is genoemd en ook gewoon Elian Chitchum as ben wel en kan ha so step kultan as knochen kokas Jan Damotel wees kochen kultans as genoemd as ik mijn stwachtles as knochen dwacht in Squaxty Ron Ignace Samachin Kametlen and Secwėpemc Nation. Thank you. I'm honored to be a guest in the Maori house to learn and experience the way you're striving to valiantly revitalize and strengthen your languages amongst your people. And it's been an honor to be here. My name is Ron Ignace in Western parlance, but my traditional Shuswap name, I'm of the Shuswap Nation, South Central British Columbia. My great-grandmother gave me the name Smalkin, meaning being placed at the head of an arrow.
Tell us about your grandmother and her influence on your role and where you are today.
Well, in our culture, in our traditions, great-grandmothers and grandmothers have the right to look amongst all their grandchildren and pick one and raise them, adopt them as their own. And I was fortunate to be adopted by my great-grandmother, which she was born in the 1880s. She was versed in our culture, history, language, traditions, philosophies, and worldviews. And she imbued a lot of that in me, and I was fortunate in that way. I'm glad that she did that. And it's for this reason, even though I've gone through a lot of things that many of our people, my life experience is similar to many of our Indigenous people's life experiences across the country through the ringer of systemic colonial racist policies and procedures that we've suffered through our people. I'm no exception. But I was fortunate to have the teachings and the imbued in me by my great-grandmother that I've been able to have that and carry that language today.
I'm just going to remind those that are watching at home, if you have any questions for our Commissioner, please feel free to send them through on chat because we do want to make sure that you get to ask questions and learn from our manuhiri today. But Matua, I'm keen on your story. So being raised by your grandmother, being selected to have her share the language with you. And you talked about the trials and tribulations that I don't think many New Zealanders or many Māori would truly appreciate in terms of what our Indigenous relations have been through. Can you talk about your experience growing up?
Yeah, well, I was fortunate to be raised by my great grandmother, but my mother wasn't happy about that. There was a tug of war between my grandmother and my mother. My mother would come and take me back because she was married and moved into our neighboring community in Kamloops, where the Kamloops Indian Residential School is. You know, people have heard about that because of the 215. That's my father is from that community, and where my mother married into. But I come from a community of Skeetcheston that's 60 kilometers southwest of there. Skeetcheston means it's a gathering place, and that's where my great grandparents lived, and I was raised in. And you know, I was fortunate to be raised in her family. She was the matriarch, and we had an extended family, you know, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, relatives. We all lived in a small house. Didn't seem small, but we didn't seem, even though our windows may have been broken and we had pillows plugging the holes in our windows, we didn't think that we were poverty stricken, because we were highly self-reliant. She was ensured that we were highly self-reliant, and that we had gardens and root cellars brimming full of food, rooftops with traditional foods drying on our roofs, and on meats and salmon drying on our racks, sun-dried, all of that, as well as I remember riding on horseback with her, on the back of the saddle with her, riding in the mountains, picking berries off the bushes and things of that nature. It was a great life, or crawling on the ground, weeding our gardens, all of that. And so we had a good life, but you know, that had unfortunately came to pass when the residential school, when it was time, they were looking for me to put me into residential school, because the law was that if parents or grandparents or guardians didn't put the children in residential school, they could be thrown in jail. But before I went off to residential school, my great grandmother told me that I want you to go out into the world and learn as much as you can, and once you do that, you come back and help your people. And so at the age of 10, I got thrown in Kamloops Indian Residential School. It was, I remember the first day I walked into up those stairs into that Kamloops Indian Residential School, into the foyer. I knew that I was facing a life-altering experience, and that the life I had would be no more. It still bothers me today, thinking about that moment. I cried a primal scream that I've never cried like that again. And I was there until the age of 16. When I ran away, I was in residential school for 6 years, and I ran away. I escaped from residential school. I went north because I knew if I went home southwest, they would go there and look for me. And when I got home, I found the family that I had left behind, the rich, jovial, healthy, self-reliant family, was destroyed, was gone through the colonial destruction of it's like someone had dropped a bomb in our communities. And our family was destroyed, our community was destroyed, and likewise our whole Shuswap Nation. Our Shuswap Nation is south central interior British Columbia on the west coast. BC is on the western coast of Canada. And our 17 communities, all of them suffered the same experiences. What I'm talking about is not, like I say, I'm not special. I wasn't the only one that exemplifies what happened across the whole country of Canada with Indigenous peoples as a result of the residential school system, which was designed to separate us from, our tradition, intergenerational transmission, to stop the intergenerational transmission of our knowledge of who we are as a people, of our rights to our land, and of our histories, philosophies, worldviews, and to assimilate us into a totally different world scenario. That we were once a proud nation of people that were multilingual. Today, we barely speak our own language, a handful of us, and we're very hardly competent in English even. So colonialism reduces people to the lowest common denominator, in which it has done to us as a Secwėpemc Nation, which I can only speak more of because that's who I'm more familiar with. But I see other nations have had the similar experience as well. And so that's when I left. When I got home, our home was destroyed. Our fields were no longer were fallow. Our home was gone. Our people is dispersed. So from that day on, I had to raise myself. I was on my own, and then wandered. And then finally, like I said, I believe that one day my great grandmother came down from the spirit world and gave me a spiritual kick. Told me it's time for you to smarten up.
And where did that lead? Her coming down and giving you a wee nudge.
Yeah.
Where did that take you?
I pulled myself up by my bootstraps. My mother had passed away on Skid Row in Vancouver, and I was down in Skid Row with her in Vancouver, and I began looking for a way out. I tried to join the Army. The Army refused me because I didn't have a grade 8. The reason I went to the Army because my father had fought in the Second World War with Indigenous warriors from throughout Secwėpemc country and the other nations. When we didn't have to go to war. We weren't called, our people weren't called to go to war, but they voluntarily went. And my father was underage, and he lied about his age to go to war, and he fought. When he came back, unfortunately, he was shell-shocked as the horrendous stories that he told about his experiences is unimaginable. But I thought, well, my father I tried to join the Army, but they refused me, and the best refusal I ever got in my life. But in 1960, as I said, the government opened up our right to vote, gave us a right to vote in the elections in the country, because prior to that, we were just considered children. We weren't allowed to vote.
Indigenous peoples?
Yeah, Indigenous peoples weren't allowed to vote because they were considered as children under the Indian Act, to be guardians of the state. And so, in that era, though, some people, when they joined the Army, they lost their status. And as a matter of fact, they told my father, we'll give you 160 acres of land off reserve if you sign away from as being a status Indian, and he refused. He said, "Nope, you keep that. I'm keeping my identity. It's me." And so I was glad that I didn't get accepted in the Army, and so when after 1960. If you went before 1960, if you went to university, you had to give up your status because an Indigenous person, it was felt, could not make it, and you had to be white to be in a university or a college. Mm-hmm. But after 1960, they began looking at transforming their policies in Canada, and they're looking for guinea pigs to test, see how well indigenous peoples could thrive and survive in college or university situation. And I heard about this policy, so I said, well, I'll go see what that's all about. I don't know what a guinea pig is, but I'll see what it is. And they asked, what does a guinea pig get? Does he get $50 a month, your living allowance and tuition fee? I said, well, you had me at $50 a month. So I went and took grade 8, 9, and 10, and 8, 9, and 10 in 3.5 months, 11 and 12 in 8 months. I wrote to the residential school because I said I want to go to university to become a teacher. And they wrote back to me and they said, well, you should reconsider your aspirations and think of becoming a sign painter or a caboose man. That's exact. Too bad I lost that letter. And I'm glad they wrote that letter because I won't repeat what I said about that letter.
We can imagine.
But it was good because it gave me the impetus to say, I'm going to show you what the hell I can do, you know. And I went on, I got my master's degree at the University of British Columbia, and at which point I was in 1982, and the elders back home, remembering what they were in cahoots with my great-grandmother, I believe, now that I think back, they said, it's time for you to come back and help your people. I went back to the community. Our community was under third-party management, in disarray, and alcoholism was rife, poverty was rife. And I said, well, you want me to be chief of this? So they said, yeah, but in sitting down with the elders, I was able to, they started talking to me in our language. And I sat there for a little while listening to them. And then I began, it all came back and we sat there and had a good conversation, discussing about what plans and strategies and vision they had for revitalizing our community. And they were concerned about our languages because our languages wasn't as strong as it was before when I was growing up and before I went to residential school. And so I took a note of that, and when they stood me up as chief, I worked hard to rebuild our community, took it out of deficit in 18 months, I lowered the voting age to 19, opened it up to all community members regardless of where they were, and passed a financial management law that said if I ever go into deficit, I would resign. I was chief from 1982 for a couple of years to 2019 when I stepped down to become commissioner. And was chosen, was among the candidates, it was one of the candidates that was chosen to be a commissioner. And that was, all those years I fought for languages. It took us 30 years to get to the point where we would be able to have a legislative recognition of our languages. But it was in 2016 that Trudeau announced that he wanted nation-to-nation relations with Indigenous people. So that inspired us and chiefs across the country to think more about let's go to the governments and see if we can get our languages recognized in law, to have the languages established, and language commission established, resourcing for our languages. That we had gone through that struggle in 2005, because the struggle for our languages just didn't happen overnight. It was, like years and years of fighting. Many of our people that fought for our languages, that hoped to see the day that we'll have our languages recognized in law by Canada. Unfortunately, they were not there to see that day happen. And it is because of people like them that I'm able to be here talking to you about it today. It is, I honor them and hold them up for the great fight and struggle that they did to make this day possible for me. I didn't do it. It is they that have to be honored and upheld and recognized for their sacrifices so that I could be here talking to you today. So our national chief in 2016 called me and said, I had established a national chiefs committee previously fighting for our languages, and had a task force, Canada, the task force developed calling for recognition of our languages, and we're about to implement it, but an election came along, and that task force report calling for language legislation and commission and resourcing got, in 2005, got shelved. So we had to start all over again. So in 2016, I got the call from with Trudeau getting elected and calling for nation-to-nation relations. The national chief called me and said, I want you to help establish the National Chiefs Committee on Languages so that we can go after language legislation, and I'll be your co-chair. And I said, phenomenal, we'll do it. And we did. And so by 2019, we had the Indigenous Languages Act, which was co-developed with the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations, which was a new, normally legislation was done behind closed doors. But this was co-developed with our leadership across the country. And it got passed with the all-party support in both houses, Senate and Parliament. Passed it unanimously, and that led to, out of that came the Indigenous Languages Commission. But the Indigenous Languages Act in passing was historic insofar as that it was the only act that recognized our rights in law. All other rights in the Constitution of Canada were undefined rights. Only recently has there been a second one, Child and Family Act, that has been passed into law and recognized that way, which referenced the Indigenous Languages Act, which is good. And but what I say to our people, I said, it's great that we have our Indigenous Languages Act in place. The fight for our languages is over. So the fight is no longer for the recognition of our rights to our languages. Now the fight moves on to how to implement that right. And so I go on and say it, let us know this, that the Indigenous Languages Act in and of itself will not bring our languages back. It is what we as Indigenous peoples, the government and Canadians do that will lead to transformative change to the country. So that's the position that we hold and I take. And so, but we honor that right. And so that's where we're at, and that's where the Commission's focus is struggling on the implementation of that right that's recognized. The Commission is not an agent of the Crown. We don't report to the Federal Administrative Act, nor are we employees of the Federal Crown, federal administration. We're independent.
To help us understand the challenge of your commission, because from Te Taurawhiri's perspective, we're a small country, New Tirini, Aotearoa, we're small, but we have, and yes, we've got many tribes, but we essentially have one language. Yes, we have unique regional variations and dialects, but the base language is still the same. Can you help us understand the challenge that your commission faces in Canada?
There are many challenges that we have. Number one, fundamentally, is because one of the great challenges that we have is we have 70 different languages across a vast country, and in the northern part of the country, transportation and communication is a serious problem because you're way out in the north in the bush. There's in many places the only way to get there is by boat or by seaplane or by plane, different ways and means. And where we have the benefit of Wi-Fi in the southern part of the country, they're having Wi-Fi is a very difficult thing to come by in the north.
So 70 languages, You've got geographical challenges. The size of Canada is enormous, and you've got populations of people that are remote. They live remotely. They're hard to get to. What is the state of those 70 languages? How healthy are they?
Generally, the Indigenous languages across country can be characterized as critically endangered, meaning that there's a few speakers left and maybe none. But as well, there are endangered languages that have, a number of L1 speakers that are still there. But even the larger languages that are viable, they're threatened. So no language in Canada is safe. And the other, the vastness of our languages and the state of our languages across the country varies. There is a problem to try to contend with how do we design a strategy to revitalize our languages. But that's just the other problem is that in Canada we have the federal government. Now, federal legislation, the Federal Indigenous Languages Act is a federal act, but what the federal government has done in the past is that it's devolved education to the provinces who have their own legislations, their own laws and practices of how to govern their territories. And there's 10 of those provinces and 3 territories. And each of them have different types of government, and they have their own ways and means, and some of them, and they've benefited from the assimilation of Indigenous peoples and our lands and resources. For example, in British Columbia, we had a homeland of 180,000 square kilometers, but today, as a Shuswap people, we only occupy 1% of our territory because we've been rounded up into 17 separate communities, into reservation systems that were governed by this Indian Act federally that rules how we live, breathe, and die even. And we don't have the right. They determine our status. We don't have the right to determine who we are. The government determines that. So that's another issue. So we're trying to. We have to reach out to the provinces, and get the provinces to say, look, now we have the Indigenous Languages Act that recognizes our rights in law. Now your laws are still embedded with systemic racist laws, policies, and practices, and it's and if you wish to move this country towards reconciliation, as reconciliation is not an Indigenous problem, it's a Canada problem. So all of Canada has to engage in it. So we want you to sit down with us and see how we could move, open up your legislations to recognize our language rights and implement policies and procedures that will allow our languages to grow and flourish, or the opportunity to grow and flourish. And so we've been able to meet with 3 different provinces who are in agreement to that. We've got the others to, once I get home, to work with to get them to make that consideration as well.
You talked about the provincial governments having mandate for education, and it's an aspiration of yours to see the languages taught in schools. What is your plan to do that? How are you going to progress that?
See, the universities, in order to the provincial government through the education system holds the accreditation. So if you want to graduate from grade 12 and even in our community schools, I know our chiefs fought for many years across Canada for Indian control of Indian education. Well, what the provinces and the federal governments did is they said, okay, we'll build schools in your communities, but we're still under the provincial, governed by the laws of the province on what we can teach. So we still can't teach our languages. We're lucky if we can maybe do 10, 15 minutes a day for 3 days a week. And for 30 years we tried that and we could not create a speaker. So now we're trying to get the provincial government to open up the universities and get the universities support in the provinces to establish an Indigenous Languages immersion teacher training program. No other way forward if we're to revitalize our languages is through immersion. And that has been demonstrated here in your country with the Maori language. Immersion is the only way forward for the revitalization of our languages. So that's what we're in discussions with the provinces to open that up so that we can begin training new speakers, new teachers to create new speakers, and so on. It's a lot of legalese and politics to go through, and each province has different political parties. Some much more progressive than others that we have to deal with.
Your wife and yourself for a long time now have researched your history, the stories of your people, and also language revitalisation. What is it that still excites you about the opportunities for you and your people with the revitalisation of your languages?
Well, I mean, we've worked with elders, and we've together spent 15 years of each other's lives, combined of 30 years, and we're able to document and write a book on the 10,000-year history of our life on our homelands. And through that, I've worked with elders across the country and sat and interviewed 150 elders for that book and heard of the stories. And in those stories, you find our visions, our laws, our philosophies, our ways of managing the land, ways that we can conduct nation-to-nation relationships. And we have great depths and knowledge, the vastness of our knowledge that's in our histories and our stories is incredible. And it's not, and I can imagine the vast wisdom and depth of the knowledge of the Maori people. I mean, having come where you sailed across oceans without the modern technology of GPS that we have today, the knowledge and skill to build those types of canoes, the technology of that time, of that era, is vast and incredible. We Indigenous peoples around the world have great knowledge that way. As a matter of fact, I like to point out that one of our ancient words in our language is this four-letter word, and it's explosive, T-U-L-T, and it's tult. And the definition of that word is the ability for one to utilize their energy to transform matter. And we use that knowledge to manage our lands and resources and relationships with each other and other peoples down through the ages. It's guided us and done us well. And I've been able to document our laws of how we governed each other, the law of reciprocal accountability, the law of quiet enjoyment, how we can attain quiet enjoyment, which in our language it's the law of quiet enjoyment is expressed in our language through yauyut. In English, it's quiet enjoyment. We say yauyut, the ability to enjoy your land and your culture and your life on your homeland and on your terms. Those are in our stories. That's what excites me. We need to reestablish that knowledge so that we can contribute. There is no one set knowledge in the world that gives answer to all, but collectively we can create a great future for all our peoples going forward. We look at where the world is at today. It's because, as our people said, if we disrespect the land will turn on us. And that's what's happening today with climate change. It's because of the disrespect of Mother Earth that's been carried out. And we lived to the first climate change 10,000 years ago, and we learned certain things from that era that's been handed down through the ages. And we would love to be able to share that with Canada to help push back on climate change through that knowledge that we have experienced through the ages. But they don't, there's a sense that Indigenous people's knowledge is not worth consideration. So that's a big fight that we have, and I love that challenge.
E tika ana te kōrero, ko I roto I te reo, take o tēnā, ko te mōhio o ngā tipuna. I certainly believe and agree with you that in our languages, you unlock the wisdom of our ancestors. And you're right, years, generations, centuries, millennia of watching, of observing and learning how to live in harmony, not only with each other but with this planet that is fosters us and nurtures us. So e mihi ana ki tērā whakaaro. I'm excited by that mission that you're on. You're here in New Zealand for a short time. You've joined us during Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori. Where have your travels taken you while you've been here, and what have you seen?
Well, we've been to communities. We've sat with an elder and listened to her stories in her marae, thanks to Kereama, who's with the commission, and other venues and interviews such as this, and different met with your commission here, listened to the stories, and it's been just wonderful hearing how the people are reaching out in the revitalization of the languages. They're not saying, okay, we're just going to teach ourselves the language and nobody else. They're reaching out. I see Asians and other non-Maori people sitting in the classes, learning the language, and the idea that they will become also champions for the Maori language and lift it up and move it forward. So that is inspirational, and we will be, and we're taking that on back home. And so that is why I say that if reconciliation is not an Indigenous problem, it's a whole country problem that has to engage in it. And if it means learning their languages with us, learning our stories, learning our life ways, that we got to share our knowledge with them. And as much as we share their knowledge, that there is some good knowledge in Western society that we can benefit from too, you know.
Talking about sharing of knowledge, we're going to open up for questions in a couple of minutes, but talking about sharing of knowledge, you've got a really exciting kaupapa, an important initiative that you're launching next year, which is about sharing knowledge. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the Commission is announcing that Canada's first Global Indigenous Languages Summit, Wave 25, to be held next year in Ottawa from August 11th to the 14th of 2025, and in which Wave 25, we see it as an opportunity to stand with a multitude of Indigenous nations, languages and cultures, and be part of a wave of voices committed to bringing Indigenous languages out of the shadows and into the sunshine.
Ātāhua hoki. How beautiful. We're going to start with some questions from our whānau. You can read it. We've got the special screen in front of us which helps us read people's questions. So pātai number one, question number one, and it's a question from Borneo Island. I'm hoping you know where that is. Is it close to your space? Anyway, Borneo Island. Anei te pātai. I'm currently working on proposing a policy for protection of Indigenous languages. One question I have asked frequently is why it's important to have a government policy when there are already NGOs or non-government organisations working on language revitalisation. Do you have some thoughts to offer on that?
Well, I thank those NGOs that are working on revitalization of languages, but unfortunately, they don't have the laws that govern the land that determine what can be and what won't be. Much like it was their laws that incarcerated us in residential schools, and we had to fight to transform those laws, and we had to fight to transform the laws of Canada to recognize our languages in law. And it is, and not only that, Canada has a duty and a responsibility because they're the ones that caused our languages to be in the state they're in. Mm-hmm. So they have a duty and responsibility, a fiduciary responsibility to work with us to revitalization, to revitalize our languages and to resource our languages. But we have the right to self-determination to determine how that support will take place in assisting us in breathing new life back into our languages.
What is the Commission's role in working alongside NGOs or the communities that are wanting to drive language revitalisation opportunities?
As one of the good things in the preamble to our legislation, I should point out, we fought for and we fought for the against the doctrine of discovery. And one of the things that the legislative preamble says that the doctrine of discovery is an illegitimate racist document, which I'm glad that our legislation recognizes that. But it says also that our people have the right to self-determination. Our communities are the ones that are best placed to lead the struggle. And we as a commission are there to support and champion their cause.
Oh boy, kia ora. I'll turn again to another pātai that's come in. So Matua, you've had a long-standing partnership with your alma mater, Simon Fraser University. What productive and perhaps new pathways for collaboration between academics and Indigenous communities do you envisage for the future, particularly in the area of language revitalisation?
Good question. Thank you for that. And what I championed, as a matter of fact, I'm sharing a document with you guys. It's called Partners in Success. In 1989, we pioneered a relationship with Simon Fraser University, in which I went to the university and said, look, I don't want to bring our people to the mountain. I want to take the mountain to the people. And we want to enter into a partnership with you where we can take the courses from Simon Fraser University, but bring it into the community, and we will establish our board of directors on how best to implement that. And we did, and we established it. As a matter of our first class was in the girls' dorm in the Kamloops Indian Residential School, and my executive assistant Jessica is one of those students that came through that program and went all the ways up, and now she holds a master's degree in our language. She's taught in various levels of in the education system. But one of the things that we need to move towards, and where Simon Fraser is looking at doing, is working with Indigenous peoples to establish an Indigenous languages immersion teacher training program to train teachers so that we can create new speakers, because all our L1 speakers are aging out or have passed on. So that type of bringing we don't want our people to go to the universities, but we need to bring the universities into community, because that's where our language belongs. Our language comes from the land, comes from our community, and we need to revitalize it there, not be lost in the academic world of a university and the ivory towers.
Ka tika hoki. Ka pai. Pātai 3, pātai tuatoru. Of the 70 Indigenous languages in Canada, how many of them are mutually intelligible? That is, you can go from one community with your language into another and still understand each other despite the fact the languages are different.
Well, thank you for that. At one time, prior to colonialism, we as a Shuswap people, our nation was surrounded by 10 different nations around us. And we had dealt with those nations for thousands of years, millennia. And there were sectors of our population. At one time, we were a multilingual nation, much like all other nations were multilingual. And so what we would do in those days is that if we wanted to go to another nation, we would have speakers that understood that other nation's language, and our leaders would go there with them, and they would have others that knew the other language. So through that way, sort of hop and skipping through through other people's opportunities that know the language. But also we had a language that was like a trade language and sign languages that we were able to communicate with each other. But today, we're fighting to revitalize our languages. All those languages that our people knew, of those other languages have been suppressed and denigrated, and we've lost them. And now we're fighting just to keep our own language. Like I said earlier, colonialism reduces a people to its lowest common denominator, which is sad and tragic. But I was in a conference one time, and there's a Cree person talking, and this government person came up to me and said, "Can you translate me?" I said, "I don't know. Our languages are as different as English is to Chinese to each other. So I'm sorry, I can't help you."
So once upon a time there was a culture of being multilingual, and that being very common as opposed to a generic standardised language developing.
Yeah.
And trying to revive that again is part of the challenge.
Yes.
Ka pai. Tēnā koe. You've been here for a little while now. What similarities have you found between your people at home and here, Māori here?
Well, if I may, I looked at, I heard the stories of their cultures, how innovative and creative they were, and how much like our people, and not only that, but also how you've suffered down through the ages through colonialism, and the consequences of colonialism on the Maori people, I wouldn't say are the same, but they're very similar. The impacts on the people, the lives of people, the communities, the families, and especially the languages has been very similar to what we've suffered. And I noticed that our strategies that were to revitalize our languages are similar, but we're also benefiting from each other's strategies and failures, because we as Indigenous peoples not only learn from our successes but also learn from our failures. And I think that is one of the great strengths of our peoples around the world.
Have you seen anything here whilst you've been visiting New Tirani Aotearoa that you might think of taking home? We're
while we were aware of the language nests and the successes that you've had here, I'm going to go back home and champion the notion of language nests more, implement that into our overall strategy of revitalizing our languages, because it's the children who are like sponges for the language. They learn the language, but once they've learned the language, we got to then put into plans how they can carry on and maintain the conversation that they will learn from learning their language with each other is the problem that we need to figure out how to enact that.
One last question before we let you go, and I guess we're really interested to know what your next 5 years in front of you as a commissioner looks like. We know it's a really challenging and different context that you have, trying to revitalise 70 languages in a country as huge as Canada. What do the next steps look like for you in the Commission?
Well, I think unfortunately, I believe I stated earlier at the beginning that I was appointed as Commissioner in July of 2021, but there was no Commission, and we've had to struggle to build the Commission up, which we just recently completed June of last year, along with our headquarters in Ottawa. And now we're just beginning to implement our legislation. And I only have 2 years left in my 5-year term. And so basically, like, what we're trying to do is, like I said, moving to try to get the provinces on side to engage with us on how to revitalize and work with us in the revitalization of our languages, and through languages immersion, teacher training, through the establishment of language nests. And we're going across the country. Our directors have, we started off our national event in Kamloops, in the Kamloops Indian Residential School, where I escaped from, and brought in language warriors and frontline language teachers, and used that as a model where we dialogued with Inuit, Métis, and First Nations together, and as well as asked them to inform what they thought the approach that the Commission should be taking to support them in their effort to languages, which was a great model. And they spoke of the necessity for language teachers, the necessity for language immersing, the necessity for appropriate and sufficient ongoing funding. Our funding is annual, and it's by you write a proposal, and you're lucky if you get funded on your proposal. Sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't. So there's no long-term planning. So we're moving to try to get long-term planning so people can plan, 3, 5, and 10 years ahead, which is required to stabilize a language from the loss of it. And that's where we're at right now. And whatever I'm 78 years old. When my term is up, I'll be 80. I think I'll be retiring then and leaving. But we've got a commission in place that's sound. We've been able to get it established. It was annually funded, but we fought hard and got it established on a 10-year grant with an escalator clause. So it's the commission is going to be stabilized, and now we need to move towards establishing that for our Indigenous languages across the country. And the fight will continue on, and Yauski stilkmentem stilkstem ochpeltankt asustam wilma yaus, as in your language you say aki aki aki. We will be fighting in many ways and many strategies and trials and errors to revitalize our languages so that we'll have them ongoing forever and ever.
Tēnā koe. Matua, is there anything else you'd like to say before I close us off for our session today?
I'm honored to be here and look forward to our ongoing relationships going forward. And I'm grateful for the great hospitality shown to me here by the Maori people. And we've often looked this way for inspiration, and we will continue to do so. And thank you for that inspiration. It gives us the hope for a future.
O matua e tika ana te kōrero, he mumu koe. Ko koe tērā te whakaihu waka o te reo whakarauora. No mātou te whiwhi, no mātou te waimaria, kua piri mai koe kia mātou I tēnei rā. Matua, it's indeed an absolute honour to have found time to sit with you today. You are a warrior, you are a light bringer for your people and for our languages, and we are deeply humbled and honoured that you've taken time to share with us today. Hoi anō kia koutou, e mātakitaki mai tēnā koutou. Kia whakairia ngā kōrero ki te tāhuhu o tō tātou whare, te whare o te reo Māori ora, tūturu whiti whakamaua kia tīna, tīna, huie, tai ki e.